Ladies, gentlemen, excellencies, distinguished guests, welcome to this AU-EU Balanced Narratives Dialogue on Digitalization. Today, we're particularly focused on the digital single market and digital infrastructure. My name is Rob Floyd. I'm the Director for Innovation and Digital Policy at the African Center for Economic Transformation in Accra, Ghana. We're known by our acronym ACET. A warm welcome to everyone in person and everyone online. I think we have probably more than 60 people join us from around the world online as well. This program on EU-AU balanced narratives is supported by our partner, the European Delegation to the AU and UNECA. We're very pleased that the EU delegation and the Rwandan embassy to the AU and Ethiopia are hosts for this event. The program is also a partnership among African and European think tanks to include ECDPM, the European Center for Development Policy and Management, the Policy Center for the New South in Rabat, the Institute for Security Studies in South Africa, and ACET. Today's discussion is on the digital single market and digital infrastructure. Our organizations have been undertaking analysis, convening policy dialogue to help inform the engagement between European stakeholders and African stakeholders, particularly the EU and the AU, and also their member states. Yesterday, we held a very good workshop, consultative workshop, with representatives from 20 think tanks, RECs, parliamentarians, youth, the private sector. My colleague, Melody Musoni from ECDPM, will give an overview and the key messages from that workshop yesterday. But we see that as an input to today's discussion. We have a great panel of experts lined up to dive deeper into those key messages and help craft specific policy recommendations that will then go into a policy brief that will be published in the coming weeks that we will then distribute to our colleagues at the AU and the EU. We hope to have some time at the end for questions from the audience, both online and in person. For those online, there's a chat function that we'll be following, so put your questions there. Today's event will be concluded with comments from the European delegation. We invite those in person to stay for a cocktail reception immediately afterwards, just outside. I should say this event is open to the public online and it is being recorded. All courtesies and protocols are hereby observed. We first have introductory remarks of about 10 minutes each from Ambassador Birgit Markussen, the EU Ambassador to the AU and the UNECA, Mr. Moses Bayagana, Head of the Information Society Division of the African Union Commission, and Deputy Ambassador Robert Opira, Deputy Rwandan Ambassador to the AU and to Ethiopia. With that, Ambassador Markussen.
A warm welcome. Good to see you here in the room, many friends and colleagues, and also I see friends and colleagues online. A warm welcome to all of you. So distinguished partners and friends, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the European Union, I would like to thank you all for taking part in this exciting discussion. I have high expectations for today. I'm extremely happy about the turnout online and here in the room. Thank you for making the way through the traffic of Addis Ababa. I'm glad that we can continue our series of discussions with our partners from the think tank, policy-making community and the wider community of partners, following the successful launch that we had, the first event on energy and climate change in January this year. I would like to extend a special thanks to our co-host from the Rwandan embassy that was already mentioned, and also, of course, from the AU, our day-to-day partner at AU Commission. It's good to see you here. Likewise, I would like to honor our partners in the African and European think tank community, the African Center for Economic Transformation that we just saw in the introduction, the European Center for Development Policy Management, and the Institute for Security Studies, and the Policy Center for the New South. A warm welcome also to my sister, leading the ITU, who is here. It's good to see you in the room. I'm very happy that you could be here. My colleagues will know that I can't start this type of discussions without just adding a little bit of a personal flavor to the very, very excellent speech that I have. You know, I'm a lady who has now a bit of experience. I actually did my PhD on ICT and farmers in Mexico. And at that time, it was very much about farmers getting access to ICTs, but also both getting the information. But I saw very touched farmers at that time. At that time was actually a UN program. I was studying FAO that also recorded the farmers' stories and seeing themselves on this media, this ICT technology, which they felt was, you know, that was the center, the capitals and so on, but that they saw themselves really moved them. Today, ICT is, of course, about still information to farmers, to fishermen, all over Africa, all over the world. And it's also about, it's not only feeding information to marginalized societies, it's also a matter of being online as much as possible, because this is the today's global setting. So I'll also allow myself to add a few words and ideas of how this think tank project and program that we're running, how it actually came about. The AU-EU relations today are still a niche subject, home to a fairly, we have to be honest, a small community, although we would like it to be a big community of political and policy experts, both on the European and on the African continent. As the continent-to-continent dialogue moves forward, because that's part of the raison d'etre also for our delegation here in Addis Ababa, as it moves forwards and seeks to open a new chapter of Africa-EU relations, there is a need to bring in plural African and European perspectives to better connect the partnership with the day-to-day reality in the respective member states and to back the evolving partnership narrative with policy options to which societies and both continents can really see themselves in. We as the EU recognize the importance of dialogue for improving policymaking and strives to bring a diverse group of stakeholders together to exactly this end. All too often, this dialogue is, I would be brave and say, would be unbalanced at times and includes the perspectives perhaps only of one group of stakeholders. Thus, this event, what we try to and aim to do is to broaden exactly this policy research community that feeds into the AU-EU partnership. We really need your inspirations and your insights. Bringing in the practical views beyond Brussels and the Addis bubbles. So it's a kind of reality check that we are here to do today and that we aim to do for each of these sessions. So thank you very much for being here today. I'm going to focus on 6 issues in my introduction right now. The first one is related to the digital infrastructure and the single market. So, as was said, today's discussion will focus on the digital sphere of our cooperation, specifically on the thematic areas of digital infrastructure and the digital single market in light of the high political interest given to this agenda in both Africa and Europe, and the urgency to move forward and jointly identify and achieve ambitious and sustainable solutions. These subjects featured high also on the agenda of our last EU-AU summit that we held back in 2022. My second subject or point I want to make is about what is the EU approach to this. Our approach to digital cooperation is based on a human-centered and inclusive digital transformation agenda, with particular focus on e-governance, digital connectivity, leave no one behind is also important here, and what I said in my little story as introduction with the marginalized groups, and entrepreneurship, as well as the digital skills. The benefits of closing the digital divide and the digital transition can only be fully harnessed in parallel with improving people's skills and digital literacy. We must ensure trusted connectivity, fair digital markets, and bridging the digital divide, while particular attention should be paid to vulnerable groups. Not only vulnerable, but also strong women and youth. My third point is really to talk about the quality and the importance of quality also when we talk about digitalization. Quality digital infrastructure is a fundamental pillar of EU support worldwide and in Africa. 1.7 trillion of the world's 15 trillion infrastructure gaps between now and 2040 is on the African continent. This includes digital infrastructure. And this is actually numbers so it's 1.7 trillion US dollar that is foreseen of the world's 15 trillion US dollar infrastructure gap in terms of investments. During the last 6 EU summit held in February 2022, we announced the Global Gateway Africa-Europe investment package of at least 150 billion euro that will support our joint ambitions for 2030 and AU Agenda 2063, composed of an investment, a health and education package. The investment package will help build more diversified, inclusive, sustainable and resilient economies. In the digital sphere, it will support a digital transformation. That's the ambition. That supports trusted connectivity through investments in digital infrastructures, alongside with both energy and transport. And it's aligned with the AU Programme for Infrastructure Development in Africa, the PIDA Hub 2, Implementation Plan 2, and an affordable and enhanced access to the digital and data economy, while also boosting digital entrepreneurship and skills. As part of our Global Gateway strategy, our plan for scaling up high-quality, sustainable investments, we aim to dedicate approximately 10% of our investments under the plan to work with our partner countries on the deployment of affordable, secure, and quality digital networks and infrastructures, using trusted vendors. Concrete progress is already made with the rollout of projects such as the 100 million Euro Africa Gateway cable linking our two continents, or the initiative to build regional fiber optic backbones across Africa. I've seen the maps of this, it looks fantastic. Further providing, of course, the necessary broadband, which is needed across the continent to connect more people to the internet. My fourth point today is about the role of the software. It's good to have the investments, and we need that in the hardware, but at the same time, as we talk about hardware infrastructure, it's only part of the story. The software is also key with a need to reduce legal, regulatory, and technical barriers to cross-border online activities and encourage market access. In other words, we cannot overstate the importance of an African single digital market. One key objective of digital transformation strategy is exactly building a secured digital single market in Africa by 2030, where free movement of persons, services, and capital is ensured, and individuals and businesses can seamlessly access and engage in online activities in line with Africa's Continental Free Trade Area, the AfCFTA. One needs also to work on common standards, technology transfer, and skills. The Global Gateway strategy combines hardware with software investments. In doing so, it creates
what we think is a powerful transformation and transformative package. Should I move closer?
Okay, I will just move closer. I hope you heard most of what I said. Okay, because if not, I will have to start. That's a tricky issue. Okay, we're now at my fifth point, because what I think is important here is to talk about how it links into the continental African AU strategies and policies. Because to complement connectivity efforts, we as the European Union support inter alia the harmonizations of policies and the regulatory frameworks through the Policy and Regulation Initiative for Digital Africa, the PRIDA project. Already, we've done this since 2018 and will continue to do in the future. There's a new PRIDA successor project. In particular, PRIDA has supported the development of the draft strategy on policy and regulatory environment for Africa's digital single market. Just recently, a validation workshop was successfully held, and the strategy is expected to be adopted during the specialized technical committee later this year. My final and sixth point is about the digital partnerships. I would like to quickly come back to our overall digital partnership with the African Union and stress that there is a mutually strong interest on both sides to reinforce the AU-EU digital partnership, and that the partnership presents an opportunity for a win-win situation. We as the European Union surely have value to offer in other emerging technology fields. It is currently considered a new legal framework related to artificial intelligence and so on and so forth, that aims to significantly bolster regulations on the development and use of artificial intelligence. It stands ready to offer to help partner countries in the future in these fields. It is clear to us that the partnership also needs to be aligned with both EU and AU strategies and frameworks. We talk about AU, DTS, the EU Digital Compass, the Global Gateway, to mention a few, in line with a human-centric, inclusive digital transformation, which is a view shared by our AU partners. To conclude, I look forward to hearing African and European think tanks, critical observations and suggestions today. And I would again like really to express my appreciation to our partners of the African Union and the African Union member states for the good cooperation we have on digital already, and for their openness and commitment to jointly explore how our partnership can be deepened and developed further to help promote the highest possible ambition across the different tracks of negotiations. So in short, it's about inclusivity, it's about access, it's about also protection. When we talk about software, it's also important to have legislation in place. And it's about the infrastructure, the single market, our EU approach, the importance of quality, the AU policies, alignment, and of course, all the partnerships that we are seeing today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ambassador. If we had known that you were an expert in ICT issues around access and equity, we would have had you on the panel. You would be happy to know that this was discussed at the workshop quite in depth, and the particularly your point about this is not necessarily disadvantaged groups, but it's about ensuring that everyone has access and equity. Thank you very much. I'll now ask Mr. Moses Bayangana, Head of Information Society Division of the African Union Commission. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Your Excellency, EU Ambassador to the AU, Your Excellencies, members of the diplomatic community in Addis Ababa, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the African Union Commission, it is my pleasure and honor to join you in today's dialogue on digitalization as part of the AU-EU Relations Balanced Narratives Initiative. And we thank the EU and the Embassy of Rwanda, and indeed all of you for your contributions to this dialogue. With the current global crisis having serious impacts on Africa, digitalization can enable economic transformation towards a path of green, resilient, and inclusive growth. When the AU was established in 2002, internet penetration in Africa was negligible. I just want to try to describe Africa's digital transformation journey just in brief. Even by 2007, only 5% of Africa's population was online, and only 1 out of 4 Africans had a mobile phone. Nearly 2 decades later, internet penetration in Africa has improved, reaching an average of around 40%, plus or minus, given based on different sources. With Africa's 570 million internet users today, expected to increase over the next decade to comprise about 16% of the global total from the current 11%. Indeed, Africa's digital economy has been growing, and progress is being made in the area of digital connectivity, with African companies such as Liquid and MTN investing in digital connectivity across Africa. You are all aware Safaricom has recently expanded beyond Kenya's borders into Ethiopia. International operators such as Orange and Vodafone also continue to invest in Africa. At the continental level, the AU Commission has been making progress, working on developing the policy context and the strategy for the policy context and strategies around digitalization. The digital transformation strategy for Africa has been developed and adopted as a comprehensive 10-year forward-looking continental strategy that is aligned with the AU Agenda 2063 and the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So this is our strategy from 2020 to 2030. It lays out an overarching strategy and sets out a vision for Africa's digital transformation and emphasizes African ownership, that Africa needs to be a producer and not only a consumer in the global digital economy. One of the key objectives of the digital transformation strategy for Africa is the establishment of the single digital market in Africa by 2030 to contribute to the realization of the African Continental Free Trade Area. It will be built, the single digital market will be built based on reliable, trustworthy, and affordable networks and services that safeguard consumers' rights to privacy and personal data protection, while also encouraging innovation and providing businesses, particularly to the young and women entrepreneurs. While national digital strategies emphasize the socio-economic advantage of digitalization, each country presents different challenges and levels of digital development. To this end, as part of the implementation of the digital transformation strategy for Africa, the AU Commission embarked on development of inclusive, continental frameworks to facilitate continental harmonization. These include the following: the AU Data Policy Framework to facilitate flow of data across sectors and borders while ensuring data privacy and security, the AU Interoperability Framework for Digital ID to modernize digital ID systems that are inclusive, trusted, and interoperable, the strategy to create enabling policy and regulatory environment conducive for the establishment of a single digital market in line with FCFTA, and the sectorial digital strategies in education, agriculture, health, and e-commerce to facilitate scaling up access to smart digital technologies and associated data-driven services across all sectors. Allow me at this opportunity to extend our thanks to the EU and the federal government or the Federal Republic of Germany that have accompanied us in developing the frameworks I just mentioned. Thank you. Your Excellencies, Ambassador, ladies and gentlemen, while there have been progress in Africa, Africa still has a significant journey ahead for an inclusive digital transformation to be realized. We need to accelerate the bridging of the digital divide in Africa by addressing inequalities and ensuring meaningful and affordable access to all. With only 40% using internet in Africa, of which 64% are urban and 23% are rural, the need for increased attention and efforts to bridge the urban and rural digital divide cannot be overemphasized. The gender gap also needs to be bridged. In 2022, 45% of Africa's internet users were male, while 34% were female. Closing the gender digital divide matters for many reasons. These disparities limit women's access to the full range of opportunities offered by digitalization. Affordability to increase usage is also essential. In 2022, data-only mobile broadband prices stood at 5% of gross national income per capita, while fixed broadband prices stood at 15.6% of gross national income per capita. This leaves many of our population, a majority of our population, without being able to afford access to digital networks and services, and needs to be addressed. We need to accelerate Africa's digital transformation journey while at the same time moving together as a continent without leaving anyone behind, as Ambassador just mentioned to us. As the African adage says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. In conclusion, we look forward to continued dialogue and cooperation between Africa and Europe. I thank you.
Thank you very much for those words, and we certainly appreciate the support of the African Union and Commission in driving Africa's digital transformation. It's central to what's happening in each individual country to ensure that there's a well-guided and well-informed process. Next, we have a recording from Deputy Ambassador Apira. He had to travel at the last minute, but was very kind to also at the last minute to record his comments. Kathleen, can you start the video, please? We cannot hear it on this side.
Your Excellency Ambassador, Bridget McCarson, EU Ambassador to AU and UNECA, Your Excellency Commissioner Dr. Amani Abu Zaid, AU Commissioner for Infrastructure and Energy, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol observed. First of all, allow me to congratulate the EU and distinguished participants for having come together to organize this event. And we at the Embassy of the Republic of Rwanda, we are happy to join you today, and we pay or express our gratitude to be joining you to this incredible event that discusses not only the present, but also the future and the past that has been a consequence of the present situation that we find ourselves in. The present situation is that the digital divide we see today is a consequence of a past that was not carefully managed, a past in which development path of the world took different directions. And here we are discussing on how those who were left behind can catch up. So we are excited to talk about digital infrastructure and digital marketplaces and how this can be enhanced to benefit not only the continent, but also individual countries in Africa. If I can borrow from my country's own experiences, Rwanda's ICT sector has registered tremendous progress over the last 2 decades, thanks to the visionary leadership of our president and the partnerships we have forged with various actors in the digital space. It has paved the way for private sector to collaborate and co-invest in rolling out high-speed broadband networks across our country. We also continue to seek ways to achieve our ambitious vision of becoming a knowledge-based economy, and we have prioritized leveraging the state-of-the-art infrastructure to support development of homegrown solutions that address challenges unique to our country and indeed to our continent. We are witnesses to the improved healthcare delivery powered by drones. We have seen citizens and businesses able to access services online, and this has driven an inclusive, cashless, and paperless economy. In the impact of this new wave of innovations in developing economies, it has been very transformational, and it makes it possible to leapfrog generations of long-established technologies that some of our member states have not been able to utilize. Rwanda firmly believes that the role of African Union in bringing together member states to debate key policy issues and work towards a sustainable digital future is a crucial role that today has generated more interest in member states than we could have imagined. We have seen the call for action from the Commission to governments, development partners, private sector, to make internet connectivity accessible, available, affordable through creating enabling environment, as well as providing the requisite infrastructure required to invent and innovate. Most of us, however, do always champion, and as I've just mentioned myself, the cause for access to internet, but most often we forget the component of affordability of the same internet, which is an equally important element for business to partake and to participate in the digital economy. What we have learned in our country's digital transformation journey so far is that lack of affordable internet, lack of access to education and digital literacy in using modern technologies effectively and efficiently, inadequate infrastructure, chief among which includes unreliable access to electricity, lack of access to technology such as computers and digital devices, lack of safe storage locations and data centers are all factors that make our fight to bridge the digital divide less progressive. We cannot, however, talk about digital single market without talking about digital payments. Digital payments have really, in recent times, enabled the purchase of goods and services to be less strenuous. This has much more been evident during the COVID-19 pandemic, in which many communities could not move freely to transact. And digital payments have also made it possible for governments who have and are continuing to pursue cashless economic policies to find leverage in this field. Therefore, to make tangible progress in digital infrastructure and digital marketplaces, and to leapfrog the current digital divide, we propose that access to infrastructure and digital literacy be prioritized. Digital literacy creates entrepreneurial skills in order to have a pool of tech-savvy workforce to build robust digital economies and competitive markets. In Rwanda, priority in human capital development has been placed in what is usually called in short terms, STEM, that is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Rwanda is actively promoting STEM education across all levels of study, and this is in line with the African Union's Agenda 2063, and it is in line with the African Union Continental Education Strategy that places emphasis on Africa's education and training systems to generate sustainable knowledge, competencies, skills, innovation, creativity, which is suitable for the required Africa development aspirations. Therefore, in conclusion, leveraging on public-private partnerships and other partnerships such as the AU-EU partnership to expand affordable access to infrastructure and digital access to equipments, we believe that businesses and communities will be able to generate required access, but also skills required to tap into the digital economy. We also support and promote the adoption of policies and regulations that promote open, interoperable, and secure digital infrastructure, as well as the adoption of cybersecurity practices in order to reduce this destructive cybercrime that results from the use of digital marketplaces and online presence. In Africa, the potential for digital dividends in finance, e-commerce, logistics, manufacturing, health, education, and in agriculture, to mention but a few, is not in doubt and can still be harnessed. But turning the vast potential into reality requires that we collectively invest in infrastructure and best regulatory practices to guarantee a level playing field for our businesses and other collaborators. Rwanda is therefore always ready to collaborate towards this noble goal of digitizing Africa and reaping the benefits of the fourth industrial revolution. Thank you for your kind attention, and I congratulate you all and look forward to the conclusions and recommendations from this conference. I thank you.
We thank Deputy Ambassador Apira for his comments, and certainly Rwanda serves as a leader and good practices across many of the digital space. We're going to move to the next segment now. I will ask my colleague Melody Masoni to give an overview from the workshop yesterday, highlighting some of those key messages that then will feed into the panel, which will be coming up next. Melody?
Hi, very good evening, Her Excellency Ambassador Markusen, His Excellency Robert Apira, Mr. Moses Baingana, and all the esteemed guests who are joining us both online and off-site. It is a pleasure to share with you the key messages from the workshop that we held yesterday. I invited African and European think tanks and policy institutions to an open dialogue on digitalization, a part of the EU Relations Balanced Narrative Initiative. There was a total of 24 experts representing different stakeholders from the private sector, civil society organizations, research institutions, parliamentarians, and the youth. And our discussion mainly focused on two themes. One, which is Africa's digital single market, and the second discussion was mainly on digital infrastructure. And with the digital single market, the development of the African Continental Free Trade Area is one of the African Union's master plans and aspirations for the continent. The AFCFTA is envisaged as the largest free trade area in the world. Complementing this, the AU Digital Transformation Strategy for Africa 2020 to 2030 also envisages the development of an African digital single market. The DTS envisions a secured digital single market in Africa by 2030, where free movement of people, services, and capital is ensured, and individuals and businesses can seamlessly access and engage in online activities in line with the AFCFTA. But there are many challenges to making this a reality. For example, how do laws, regulations, rules, and policies shape the African digital single market? And which laws should the AU initially prioritize to ensure an efficient and coordinated African digital single market? In this context, we engaged with the experts yesterday to look at the existing challenges that can hinder the progress and successful operation of the African digital single market, as well as the priorities that need urgent attention. We also discussed the active implementation of the AU policy frameworks at national levels and the role of the European Union. From these discussions, we took note of key messages that I'm going to share with you today. So the first message and key takeaway from the conversations that we had was around digital infrastructure and internet connectivity. Digital infrastructure in connecting everyone in Africa was identified as a foundational pillar that African Union member states need to prioritize for a successful and effective digital single market for Africa. Stakeholders noted that African countries need to ensure inclusive digital infrastructure that addresses issues such as connectivity, the connectivity gap, different forms of digital divides, from urban-rural digital divides, digital divides between low-income earners and high-income earners, gender digital divides as well. To looking at high cost of data, Mr. Baingane had also mentioned the issue of affordability. So you find that a lot of internet service providers in Africa are charging quite high for access to the internet. So that was a major concern that our experts raised. And this also indirectly or directly affect internet access. And we need to also address last mile connectivity challenges that currently exist. In addition to recommendations on investment on digital infrastructure, the experts pointed to the need for member states to engage with the private sector to address issues around competition and issues around taxation, as well as incentives for infrastructure rollouts in certain areas. The next key message or key takeaway from the discussions we had was around policy and regulatory frameworks. Throughout the discussions, there was a general consensus on the important role that policy and regulatory frameworks play in Africa's digital single market. It was pointed out that national governments need to start implementing policy and regulatory frameworks which align with AU frameworks on data governance. We look at the AU Data Policy Framework, AU Framework on Data Protection, Cybersecurity and Protection of Consumers, looking at the Malabo Convention, as well as issues around cross-border data flows. There was also a discussion on the importance of alignment and harmonization of laws by member states for it to remain a priority. Some countries, it was pointed out, that need to be supported through financial and technical means to implement these policy frameworks domestically. And one way of getting this support is through leveraging the relations which Africa has with its international partners like the European Union. There was also a point raised on the importance of reinforcing the rules and procedures around dispute resolution mechanisms. And it was also mentioned that African countries also need to build confidence and trust with each other. And moving to the next key message around digital skills and digital literacy. It was pointed out by many that the majority of African citizens are not digitally literate and lack the relevant digital skills needed to benefit from the digital single market. There should be programs developed to provide the right digital skills across different demographics. And there is also need for awareness campaigns on the importance of the digital single market and digitalization for citizens. And such awareness campaigns should also tackle cultural practices which may inhibit women from participating actively in the digital economy. And such campaigns can also be used as platforms to build trust in the use of digital platforms. And the fourth key message from yesterday's workshop was on the importance of cybersecurity and data protection. It was identified that security and data protection are very important for us to talk of a successful African digital single market. When we look at digital transactions and digital payment systems, it's important to have secure systems to prevent any forms of security threats and security breaches. It was discussed that insecure digital services and platforms may discourage people from participating and benefiting from the digital single market. Whilst there is a need for member states to put in place cybercrime laws and cybersecurity strategies, it was also proposed that governments need to engage with service providers operating on the continent to encourage the adoption of international best practices on cybersecurity policies and privacy standards, which are similar to those that they offer in other regions like the European Union. And the key takeaway relating to taxation of digital services. There was a point that was raised on the role of tech companies operating in Africa, that they are able to monetize the data they extract from Africa, but unfortunately, some of these companies are not paying taxes. there is an opportunity for African governments to actually generate revenue via taxing some of these digital companies. However, it was also pointed out that when developing laws and policies on taxation, they should be appropriate to promote internet access and affordability. And the sixth key message related to interoperability. It was mentioned that an African digital single market will mainly rely on digital ID systems to enable people to transact. The challenge is that in many instances, digital systems and digital payment systems in Africa are not interoperable. People may not be able to use their digital ID to access a service or transact from a different country, as it is difficult to validate or authenticate individuals. It was shared that both the private sector and the public sector need to start working on developing common standards to ensure that digital systems are interoperable across multiple jurisdictions. And finally, on the digital single market, it was also pointed on for us to highlight the importance of recognizing parallel sectors. While addressing the issues of digital and the digital single market, the experts pointed out that governments need to build, support, and continuously service the traditional backbones of our economies, such as the transport sector, looking at our railway infrastructure and road infrastructures, as well as the energy sector. For instance, without steady supply and use of sustainable power sources like green energy, it will be difficult to supply power to digital infrastructure or run data centers on the continent. So without these critical sectors, it may be difficult to have an effective digital single market. And the second part of our workshop, we looked at digital infrastructure. Greater connectivity in Africa will require enhanced investment, particularly for last mile infrastructure. According to the Global Infrastructure Hub, the world is facing a 15 trillion infrastructure gap between now and 2040, with $1.7 trillion of that being on the African continent. At the same time, the World Bank study, Africa's Infrastructure, A Time for Transformation, indicated that poor infrastructure in Africa costs as much as 2% of economic growth annually. African leaders are keenly aware of the digital infrastructure investment gap, and hence there are numerous initiatives that seek to enhance investments. These are generally undertaken in the framework of the African Union Digital Transformation Strategy, but there are numerous challenges. For example, it is not always clear what are Africa's digital infrastructure priorities and how can they be better articulated. In that context, the experts discussed how investment in Africa's digital infrastructure can be accelerated and scaled, and importantly, how Africa and Europe can incentivize more private sector financing through jointly advocating for increased concessional resources that will support regional public goods such as cross-border and interoperable digital infrastructure. They also discussed how Europe and Africa can work together effectively to learn lessons. And the key messages were as follows. The first one is, it is critical to link digital infrastructure agenda to the development agenda. African governments, the EU and AU, can do a better job of making the development case for investment in digital infrastructure. This can include new ways of thinking. For example, evaluating the data value of digital infrastructure, value for money and data, designing mixed services infrastructure, and shared infrastructure, which may be easier to find champions. Secondly, effective and inclusive ecosystems are critical for informed infrastructure investment. The EU and AU need to better engage the private sector to include African firms and entrepreneurs. In this context, it is important to create space for co-creation and safe regulatory spaces for experimentation. Likewise, the ecosystems must include women, youth, and parliamentarians in a culturally inclusive manner. Thirdly, finance for digital infrastructure investment must include improved domestic resource mobilization and leveraging domestic capital across Africa, particularly institutional investors. In this way, the EU, through the Global Gateway and other development actors, can leverage limited resources with blended finance, guarantees, and capacity building. Finally, technical assistance remains vital. Digital infrastructure is, in many ways, a new frontier for African governments. Regulatory capacity needs to be strengthened and good practice needs to be shared and replicated. There are opportunities to create learning networks that span long project cycles. New analysis on the positive impact of digital infrastructure on human development and resilience is also needed. This is an important area of collaboration for the EU, AU, and respective member states. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Melody. I think everyone can, from that summary, get a sense of the discussion and the depth of the dialogue yesterday. Hopefully we can now go to the panel discussion and tease out a few of these items. I'm very happy that we have a very august panel of experts. See if we can get them up on the screen. The first is Nouman Ferry. He's the former Minister of Digital Economy from Tunisia, and he's the CEO of Our Digital Future. We have Benedict Erforth. He's the Senior Researcher at IDOS in Germany and the Megatrends Africa Project Lead. We have Ralph Oyini. He's the Director of Digital Transformation and Services at Smart Africa. And we have Lorberry Jady, Senior Fellow at the Policy Center for the New South. I want to start by getting some reaction from each of you on the key messages. And then we'll come back and dive a bit deeper. You all got these messages last night, so I'm sure you've been ruminating on them. But are these the right key messages to inform policy recommendations? And of which of these, which do you think is most important, particularly in the context of an EU-AU dialogue? And where do you see opportunities for greater Europe-Africa collaboration on digital single market and digital infrastructure? And what do you see as the biggest hurdles? Now, I put out a whole bunch of questions, and Melody outlined a lot of key messages, but we're still going to restrict you to 3 to 5 minutes for this initial reaction. Nouman, can I go to you first?
Okay, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you well and we see you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Really appreciate your invitation, Rob and the whole team for organizing this. Congratulations to getting a clear output out of yesterday workshops. I'll be straightforward and I will go to the key message, which is the digital infrastructure, because the first one, I think we will talk about it in the second round. The digital infrastructure side, there are 4 elements: the linking digital infrastructure agenda to development agenda. I'll be very direct with you. This requires a lot of awareness and work with governments, because most governments, including mine when I was in government, they can't see the value of having 100 miles road, toll road. They are happy to finance that, but to tell them that with the exact the exact amount. You can't finance the whole internet for the country and make it. You can even subsidize it. It's very difficult for our governments to grasp. So it requires a lot of work. And here I'd like to stress landlocked countries, African landlocked countries, and I would like to commend the work that Smart Africa, as well, and with the barrier, which has started to say to try to finance infrastructure to unlock landlocked countries. This is a very good way forward. On the effective inclusive ecosystem, the ecosystems, there is the elephant in the room that I didn't find, but I think everybody is thinking about it, is the startups and the innovation. So the idea, not the startups as a result of a good infrastructure and as a good framework. More importantly, the startups and the innovative startups who find solution for the infrastructure as an enabler. And these, we are very well advanced in Africa. And these, you call them, they started to become workaround for internet, they become the norm. So this is an important sector. I would call it the elephant in the room. How to finance these startups? What is the best way to accompany them? I think Europe is a bit more advanced in that. So maybe that is an area of working together. The third one was the financing the digital infrastructure. Yes, great. I heard about the global gateway, fantastic. But I think we need to be more innovative and get that financing, or that willing to finance, to do innovative financing for infrastructure. Infrastructure is, in theory, has to be delivered by the government through through the taxpayers. However, there are innovative ways of financing data centers, fiber optic, other satellites on private-public partnerships, where again there is a room to cooperate and find how can we finance the infrastructure on a private-public how do we do private-public project or public-private partnerships in order to finance infrastructure. These are my three remarks. So landlocked countries, and let's start with landlocked countries and support the initiative of Smart Africa and BADEA in that sense. On the second thing, let's work on startups, how to finance startups as an enabler and as the people who will change the economy. And the third one, financing infrastructure in a non-innovative way through infrastructure funds and these are the three things I had in mind on the second digital infrastructure. And on the technical assistance part, obviously, yes, I would say sharing experiences, because there are some experience in Africa that are much more developed than other places. Sharing our Euro-Africa Mediterranean is important. Thank you. And sorry if I went above my time.
No worries at all. And as always, you give us good food for thought. I'm going to come back to you on your startup comment as well. Can I move to Benedict? Can you just give us very briefly your reactions and thoughts to the key messages that came out of the workshop yesterday?
Yes, of course. First of all, thank you so much for inviting me. It's an honor to participate in this dialogue and this discussion, and I hope there will be many more follow-up occasions. And unfortunately, I was not able to follow discussions yesterday live, but obviously had a look at the key messages, and just reading them and listening to them today, there were a few things I noticed. First of all, I think on a positive note, there's a very much a common understanding of what is needed in terms of the priorities. Priorities on the sides of all stakeholders and on the sides both of the African Union and the European Union. So we are at a stage where we have like shared priorities. What is missing in the key messages, and I think that's also a bit reflective of the discourse that we are having when we're talking about the digital cooperation between the two regions, is how to get there. So I think we need to be more concrete in terms of the operationalization. And from the European side, Global Gateway is an attempt to do that. But I think very much the partnership will be measured in terms of whether or not it achieves all these at times very lofty, very ambitious goals that are set out from here to 2027, if we take just the next financial framework. So it's very much a question of the how to get there. If I can take one example, which was also mentioned in the key messages, it's the cooperation on data protection and regulatory frameworks. And it was stated that there is a consensus on the need of the data protection of individuals, of having safe regulatory frameworks that also allow for innovation. And that is the first stage, this declaration of intent. And we saw like very practical examples, for instance, in the cooperation between the Kenyan data protection regulation and the EU's role therein in terms of cooperation. But there's also a second and a third stage. And the second stage is about the implementation phase, where this declaration of intent is translated into law and practice. And that's very much about logistical challenges. It's about like very technical challenges. And there's a third stage where the regulatory framework is being enforced and actually come to life. And it's like the second and the third stage where we need to put more emphasis on, and where also the cooperation between the two regions needs to move forward. That would be the first point that I would like to make. The second point relates as well to digital infrastructure, and I think very important points have already been made, but it is also crucial, and I would fully underline what has been said in that regard, that it needs to be embedded, like the digital infrastructure debate needs to be embedded in a broader infrastructure development. Not only if we take, for instance, digital infrastructure development, but do not have an energy sector development, does it like hinder the digital development and the added value the digital can have to a market economy? It can be even detrimental. If you decide to basically translate workflows into the digital space, but then are suffering energy cuts, it can have severely negative consequences. So there needs to be a very encompassing dialogue. And again, Global Gateway seeks to give a starting point here, and we need to see whether this is going to be translated into practice. Maybe lastly, and there are a few more points, but just a short input statement, so I keep that as my last point. Lastly, we also, when we talk about digital infrastructure, and the figures have been named, these are huge sums we are talking about. It's a lot of financing needed, public financing paired with private financing and so on and so forth. We also need to have this debate on digital infrastructure needs not being detached from the overall debt debate. Because I think that is in particular at the moment a very crucial issue, and we should not like separate them and discuss them in two different silos. I will stop here and hopefully have one more opportunity afterwards to complement. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Benedict. Very much appreciated. Yeah, on embedding infrastructure, I remember it was only a few years ago you and I co-authored a piece around embedding digital more broadly, which I think one can say that there's been progress on that, and now to focus on the digital infrastructure specifically. Ralph, I'm going to come to you next. Your perspectives from Smart Africa.
Thank you, Rob, and let me start by saying thank you very quickly for having Smart Africa part of this panel. And I'm really impressed as well by the clear outputs and key messages that came from the expert workshop. We have a busy schedule. I wished I was there because it sounded like a great time. So let me dive like from a Smart Africa perspective and what we see on the ground. And I'm going to address each point and maybe give like a key word there to think about. Digital infrastructure and internet connectivity. I think about affordability. In the African context, affordability is such a big challenge as well. And we need to think about affordability when it comes to the internet, but we need also to think about affordability when it comes to smart devices, those devices to connect to the internet. Because right now, as you know, Africa is it has a lot of devices, but they are not smart to connect to 3G, 4G networks, right? The second point, policy frameworks. I'm thinking about the AFCFTA. I mean, this thing, the digital trade protocol that is being developed by the AFCFTA, going to be a game changer because compared to other frameworks, this protocol will be a binding protocol to the member states, right? So they will have to adopt this protocol, and now there is the question of enforcing this protocol across the continent. But at least this protocol is binding and it's there. It addresses like a lot of questions, challenges that we have under policy and regulatory frameworks, especially harmonization. In terms of digital skills, you see, what we do at Smart Africa with our vehicle called the Smart Africa Digital Academy is that we're trying to touch at all levels of capacity building and digital skills. I'm talking about straight from the head of state level, ministers level, all the way down to the citizens, to the startups, entrepreneurs, etc. I think you need to address skills at all levels in order for it to work. When it comes to cybersecurity and data protection, there is, let me use the word that was used by the previous panelist, the former minister of Tunisia, the elephant in the room. In this case, the elephant in the room is trust issues, right? The lack of trust within the African continent. That trust issue is due to two things: lack of infrastructure, digital infrastructure, but also lack of capacity, right? Especially the lack of capacity is nourishing this lack of trust. And this lack of trust is feeding the informal sector in Africa that is great, that is too big, right? And this informal sector is the one that is kind of causing a lot of cybersecurity issues. And let me touch on the next point, which is taxation, preventing proper taxation, right? So trust is such a real issue. We need to look at it carefully. Then there is the question of interoperability. Of course, we can think about digital payment systems. This is the obvious one. But there is also something, and I think it's the African Union, my brother that touched it during his keynote address. It's lack of interoperability between ID systems, national ID systems. Until we solve this, we're going to have some challenges. And I'm giving you like a personal example. This is like an everyday life challenge that I'm facing in Africa. I live in Rwanda, and Rwanda now has the ability to send mobile money across more than 10 countries with the MTN network, okay? So when I send money within Rwanda, I can see who's on the other side. I know because like the ID system at the national level works between operators. But now when I'm trying to send money from Rwanda to, for example, my home country in Gabon or Ghana, I cannot see who I'm sending it to. And it creates so many challenges and trust issues and security. And lastly, when it comes to other sectors, again, I agree with the previous panelist. You have to look at startups, entrepreneurs, innovators. We need to find a way to create linkages between Europe and Africa. And it already exists, but it doesn't have enough support. And this is something that we have to look after.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. Very insightful. And I think that the question on trust is one that we didn't actually get to, interestingly, yesterday in the workshop. But it's very closely linked to digital skills, as you said, right? I mean, you trust what you know. I'm working on a project on AI in economic policy making. So my clients would be ministers of finance and central bank governors. right? And most of them, when I talk to them, they say, why in the hell would I use AI? I don't know it. I don't understand it. So you have to know something to trust it. Thank you very much. Let's move to Larrabee. Can you give very briefly some thoughts from your perspective on the overall messages, and then we'll go into some more specific questions. I think you're muted. Larry, can you hear us?
It's okay now?
Yes, now we can hear you. Please proceed.
Thank you.
You've muted again. Okay. Well, you only trust the technology you know. Let me try, we'll come back to you, Larry. Let me come back to you. So why don't we jump in while we sort out that technology problem, some of the more detailed questions. There's been a lot of discussion and comments around interoperability. And Numan, I wanted to come to you on this, and I think there's a linkage also to your comments about startups and so forth, right? You've been a minister in a government. You're heavily involved in the world of entrepreneurship and innovation now. And a key message from yesterday was that governments need to incentivize cross-border trade. But there's this issue of interoperability. So what would be the one specific policy advice if you had the ear of senior EU officials and senior AU officials on how to address this issue in the short term? Because we know, as Ralph was just saying, that this has real life implications for people and paying their bills and sending money, etc. What would be your message?
Thank you. Let me elaborate and give you the message at the end, if you don't mind. Or let me give you the message easier. So for government, please do subsidize internet rather than subsidizing sugar. Internet will open the mind of people and will make them work together and will create the solution for services to become interoperable. Sugar will make them fat and will make a lot of burden on the health system on the company. If there is one single thing, is this one. But this one is only the tip of the iceberg, but based on a real life experience. When I was a minister, very clearly, I realized that we have, and this is in all Africa, by the way, that we have 21st century youth managed by 20th century governors and policymakers, and mostly using probably 19th century laws. So we had to carve a space. We had to carve a space to these people to develop a new system. If we are going to get our existing systems, our legacy system, and trying to make them interoperable, it won't work, or it will take a lot of time and will spend a lot of money. Therefore, the best way is to move to a new space where there is a new way where interoperability is much easier. And by the way, these 21st century kids or youth didn't wait for government to create their own space. We just, in Tunisia, we created the Startup Act with two objectives. The first one is to have 1,000 startups and 1 unicorn. 5 years later, we have 920 startups as per yesterday, labeled by the Ministry of Finance. And last February, a Tunisian AI company was sold in UK for 600 million pound, and it's an AI InstaDeep, which is an AI which was bought by BioNTech. So, but this is just an example that policy, when government carve a space for the startup to experiment and to do what they want, they produce. We should not burden them with our law. They need to have their own space. So these people, they went on and they said, okay, you guys are not interoperable between across the North Africa, Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco, let's say, and plus a few other countries. Therefore, if we follow the central bank rules, we will be transferring money. A transfer which will take few seconds may take few months with all your regulation, etc. So we literally, we are here declaring that we are bypassing the central banks and we are creating our own system to interoperable with our own digital currencies. And this little digital currency are taken, now is becoming big. So government has to catch up in order to do that. Therefore, what the government did, they said, okay, fine, we understood you. Don't break everything. Let's make a sandbox approach, and let's try things together. And this sandbox approach may clarify and help moving things. So my main message, that if we are waiting for government to do interoperability, it will not work. It will take a lot of time, not on my lifetime. However, if we follow all these trusted network of startups that Ralph was talking about, trust, there are thousands of trusted, thousands and tens of thousands of startups in Africa. They know each other. They are into a group, informal group, formal groups, that they are doing trade among themselves. Why it's easier? Because when you do trade in the digital sense, you don't have the customs. I'm not saying that custom is not a good thing, obviously not. But if customs is not flexible enough, they end up by being flexible through corruption or through smuggling, etc. Therefore, the new generation are saying, enough of this. This is our system. This is our digital currency. This is how we are going to do interoperability. And then I started to invent new things. And I give you one single example. Ralph mentioned about the phones. KOS, a company that makes phones that make digital payment through through phones. So my message is, don't try to regulate, follow what these startups are doing and help them accelerate what they want in the space, rather than trying to regulate it before the innovation. Let them innovate, then regulate the innovation, rather than the other way around.
Thank you. It was actually a very interesting discourse, a little bit tense yesterday, between folks that were saying, yes, we need these regulatory safe zones for people to experiment. We need co-creation, and others, a bit more traditional, maybe saying, but you need to regulate these things, right? So I think it's a very interesting tension between how do you allow unregulated development, at the same time you have to regulate it, and particularly in some of these areas where it's finance or data, et cetera. Let me see if we can get Larry back. Can we hear you? No, we seem to still have a problem there.
We can see him.
Yeah. But that doesn't help us unless we all know sign language. So let me go to Benedict. You've written extensively on new frontiers for Africa-Europe cooperation, and the challenges in cooperation have been, I think, quite well articulated here. There's a perceived lack of capacity on the part of the African Union and certainly many member states There's a perceived lack of deep and meaningful partnership on the part of the European Union in some instances. And digital is a very fast-moving space. So both in Africa and in Europe, everyone's trying to stay on top of these things. Yesterday, there was lots of discussion around the need to better engage the private sector, and I think it links to Numan's comments as well, on how to bring them into this discussion so that you actually create more trust. What are the practical mechanisms or platforms that both Europe and Africa could do to maintain a better ecosystem, particularly with the private sector? What are your thoughts on that?
Thank you. Maybe to start off, I think one important mechanism is in the partnership on digital between Africa and Europe to start to differentiate between different dimensions of the whole debate. That means that we often see, at least from the European side, it has been framed as such since 2017 when this whole digital for development agenda came up, the digital as a panacea for development cooperation. And in order, however, to basically attract the capital that is needed, and that some of the preceding speakers have already mentioned, it is necessary to basically differentiate between what is developmental action with a very strong public sector involvement and what is a business case with a very strong private sector involvement. If these areas, I mean, at times they blur and they overlap, and private sector investments can have positive impact and are supposed to have positive impact when we look at the development agendas out there. But if we do not separate those two, it is very hard to make business cases. Business cases are to be differentiated from what at one of the introductory statements by Ambassador Markussen, for instance, stated is the support to fragile contexts. And I think it is very important to say in which instance we are talking about what, in order to make those business cases also attractive for private sector investment. So more differentiation between what falls in the development cooperation area and what falls in into the private and business, in private investment area, in order to leverage the capital that is also assumed under Global Gateway. When we talk about these 150 billion of investments that are to be leveraged till 2027, a huge part of that is supposed to be private sector investments, and private sector only invests if they also see potential returns emerging thereof. Another point where cooperation can be improved and can also be taken forward is the area of data protection. I thought it was very interesting now to juxtapose those two approaches towards regulation. As you said, Rob, and as the speaker said as well, should we regulate more or should we regulate less? And the European Union has this inherent urge to regulate quite a lot because they are good at it. But one needs to be careful. So in terms of data protection regulation, the European Union has very much to offer also for this partnership. But it also needs to listen to what is wanted. If the European Union, and this is underway, I'm not saying this is not happening, but it is a very important point. If the European Union tries to externalize its data protection agenda and its data protection regulation, it needs to be aware that it is not for everyone and that it can also stifle innovation and that it's also seen as something imposed upon someone else. So in order to be successful, and that this also draws on the whole literature of norm externalization, in order for norm externalization to be successful, it needs to be implemented in geographical spaces, in areas where those norms are shared. So if there is a common agreement that we need more regulation in country A, B, or C, and the European Union can offer something, I think that is a way forward where then cooperation can emerge. But if the European Union is to basically externalize its GDPR, like generally saying this is the only way forward, I think it is difficult. I'm not saying that is the case, but one needs to be careful. And again, one needs to differentiate where is more regulation needed and where do we need maybe more slack. And last but not least, to keep it brief, Global Gateway and the cooperation surrounding it, creating those smart, sustainable infrastructure networks around the world very much depends, as I said in my first intervention, on the operationalization. It is very important to look now at the flagship projects that are rolled out. In March 2023, there was the list of 87 flagship projects that have been published. I was a bit astonished by the fact that when we look at the flagship projects for Africa, there was relatively little on digital, but I mean, that can be something related to 2023. We have little projects, we have some electricity cable linkages between Europe and North Africa, but the question is, how does this unfold over the next year? So one important point where we can measure the relationship between Africa and Europe in the digital realm is also to look at the unfolding of these flagship projects. What does materialize in the years to come? And I will stop here in consideration of the time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Benedict. I had a wager with someone whether or not we would get through this conference without mentioning GPDR, but I lost that wager. Thank you very much. I want to go to Ralph just very, very briefly, just 1 minute, because I would like to get a question or two from the audience, and we will try to end on time. But this whole issue of implementation, it's been brought up a number of times. I mean, you brought it up in the context of the protocol and kind of the same thing. It's fine to have the ratification of a protocol, but then it has to be implemented. How can individual African governments working with the AU, Smart Africa, out in NAPAT, and with the support of the EU and GIZ and others, make this implementation move more quickly? And the quality, I would say. I've been involved in policy making for a long time, and you can have bad implementation that actually leads to bad outcomes.
Rob, this is a big question for 1 minute. I'm going to try my best here by sharing some insights, two or three insights very quickly. And I love this panel. Benedict is giving some great input here, and former Minister Newman as well. Very quickly, you know, like I was on a panel 3 years ago in Estonia, Tallinn. This is a personal experience here. And I asked the other side of the coin, right? I was like, how can Europe support Africa, right? So I asked like my Estonian fellow, how can Europe support Africa? And the answer was this, and I always remember this answer. You're going to love it. He said, well, Ralph, Europe before digital had a strong market. Africa before digital, the market is not necessarily there. And he's right. When you look at cross-regional trade, well, it's almost inexistent in Africa. So the context is a little bit different, but it doesn't mean that we cannot learn from Europe. There is a lot to learn from Europe, but it has to go both ways, Rob. That's my point. Europe, in order for it to work, Europe needs to learn from African context. And Africa, of course, need to learn from Europe. And one thing that Africa needs, and going back to your question about policies, and I think Benedict touched it well, we have a lot of frameworks happening. We have great examples. What's really missing now is how to implement those frameworks, those policies. It's not like the second stage. There is a big misunderstanding happening right now across the continent. The belief is that African leaders do not want free flow of data because they want to conserve data within the national borders. No, that's not the case. From flowing, they understand that data gain in value by flowing. The concern that they have is that they do not have the capacity, most of them do not have the capacity to enforce data policy, to ensure security of the citizen data. So again, come back to this issue of trust, and what we do as Smart Africa with African Union, AFCFTA, and of course colleagues from Europe as well, is that we try to capacitate government in order to create that conducive environment for free flow of data. Let me stop here, Rob. Give me 1 minute, but let's take questions.
Thank you very much. And then I think it's a very valid point, right? I mean, it's a kind of a chicken and an egg, right? You need to implement, but you need the capacity to then enforce. And as I mentioned earlier, when you're talking about people's data or people's money, it's important that we get this right. Thomas, can I cut into your time 5 minutes to get a question or two? Do we have a question online?
Try JD again. He's ready to speak.
Okay, Larry, can you come in? Just very, very quickly though.
Hello?
Yes. Just
Can you
just 2 minutes, because I do want to get a question. We're almost out of time.
How much?
2 minutes.
2 minutes? 2 minutes for the first time and 5 minutes for the second time, I think. No?
Please proceed.
Alors, 2 minutes for the first time for the remarks about the recommendation. I think that almost everything has been said in the technical point of view. And personally, I agree with all the recommendations formulated. I have some remarks in the margin on 2 points. The first one is on the precondition or the prerequisite for digital infrastructure financing. I think that it depends on the well-established and transparent regulatory regime. And the second point, that to focus on the engagement of private sector in financing the infrastructure, we have to give an attention to expected returns and risk assessment. I think that it is an important question, because what is specific to digital infrastructure is that the risk spectrum seems to be wider than in other infrastructure asset classes. And this reflects the large range of activities covered under the label of digital infrastructure. On the second point, I think that what is important in our dialogue and our discussion is the political approach. The technical approach is very important, but what we observe is that African Union has many important, pertinent, strategic reports on all these questions on the table. But there is a large gap between the orientations which must be taken and the implementation of these orientations. So we can to have the good approach. And I think that if you want to progress on all these questions, we have to develop an approach at 3 levels. The first level is the bilateral levels. The bilateral levels between European Union and all African countries on technical assistance. And the second level is the regional level, because I think that this level is important for the cross-border question of infrastructure. And I think that the partnership between Europe and some regional entities in Africa can be the approach the most relevant in progressing on discussion. And the third one, the third level, is the African Union, European Union summits. And we have to approach this summit with not a discussion or a dialogue on strategic orientation, but on the priorities and on some programs And I think it is a better approach to create a willing approach between the two partners to progress together in the objectives. I think that it is the most, for me, it is the most important message to have is on the political level, how to act at the political level, because on technical level, we have the response of all the questions we have discussed. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. That ties in very much to Ralph's point, right? That yes, it takes political will, but you also have to have the implementation as well. Your point on risk was one that came up yesterday as well, right? So I mean, there's this significant risk premium for Africa generally, and then you look at a digital project or a digital infrastructure project, and that risk premium is even higher, right? People have built roads or built bridges for a long time, but they haven't necessarily built digital infrastructure. Okay, I'm going to take just one question. Kathleen, do we have a question selected? We do not. Okay, is there someone in the room who would like to ask a question of our panelists? Okay, please. Lana, do you have the microphone? Here. Introduce yourself, please.
Thank you very much. I'm Bios Bayu, Senior Advisor to the Minister as the Ministry of Innovation and Technology. My question, or as a remark also, the issue of digital payment is given low emphasis in general, because the issue is not about interoperability of the payments. The issue spans beyond that, like platform level, as well as regulatory harmonization, including currencies, of having common currency across Africa. And also the issue of having instant payment, instant and interoperable payment at the same time. So especially from the financial inclusive side, this will take a lot to bring this thing on board. So this must be emphasized. And the other thing—
What's your question?
My question is, I think leveraging the African experience in mobile money should be taken to a cross-border digital payment. Don't you think this is a very crucial issue in digital payment? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So the question is around the importance of being able to replicate Africa's experience in mobile money in other parts of the world. Any thoughts from our panelists on how easy or difficult that might actually be to do? Yeah, Numan, last word, please.
Yeah, we are much beyond that. I mean, yes, we were pioneer in Africa in mobile money because we did the leapfrogging because we didn't have the infrastructure. Now we are behind in mobile money transfer compared to other countries. So what is required from us today is to, government wants the thing and its opposite. From today with your phone, you can talk anywhere in Africa. There is no reason in the world where you cannot transfer money within the same way you transfer your voice or your message. Why we are having these issues? Because governments needs to decide if they leave the telecom companies to penetrate the financial sector. Therefore, they will destroy the existing banks, and the lobbying of the banks is pressuring government not to let telecom companies deliver mobile money and become themselves a bank. What will happen in that case, that the users will use other means of transferring money, and their government will lose control. So the real issue behind this is Are you ready? Are government ready to use an African digital currency with some sort of swap somewhere? And that's a big decision. It can only done by region. It can't be done within the 54 country at once. These are few thoughts. I hope that we went a bit towards what you were talking about.
Yeah, I think very much so, in fact. And yesterday in the workshop, we actually had representatives from COMISA that were explaining some of the progress happening in that region and the regional stacks and money transfers. At this point, I want to first thank everyone, particularly the European Union, the government of Rwanda, our partners, our speakers, and our panelists. I think it's been a very interesting discussion. And now Thomas has the difficult task of doing a summary. Maybe he'll just say thank you as well. But Thomas Hugebart, the head of policy and cooperation at the EU delegation. Thank you.
No, I mean, I have the difficult task. I mean, there's a nice drink and some finger food waiting for you. Unfortunately, we cannot share that with our friends online, but just indeed, a few words of thanks. But before going to a few words of thanks, just to say, like, I mean, I'm really happy. Happy because the objective was to hear different voices into the bubble. We said the bubble at the beginning, so we want to go outside of the bubble and get the different voices. And I think we've had them, of course, yesterday, but also today through the excellent panel and this community that we want to develop and build and nurture as it is so important. I think we've heard the importance of access to try to overcome the digital divide. We've heard the words of affordability, inclusiveness up to the last mile. And I think we've heard about on this infrastructure investment needs in the sector that, yes, we are not here that completely. I mean, we have definitely more to do. We need to bring private and public sector together. And also we need to integrate better the digital infrastructure investments in the broader infrastructure investment. And I think we are at the beginning, but when the European Union is working on strategic corridors, the objective is exactly that, is to combine the different things. It is to see what are the roads, the energy infrastructure needs, and the connected digital needs. And then related to that, building on regional value chains, so making sure that all these new infrastructures are having opportunities to be used, and also some of the emerging digital trade that is happening to use these frameworks. Then we've heard a lot about digital skills as an essential element of the agenda. I think for the EU, that's really also at the heart. It's like there's the global gateway. Without the human touch, without the human connection and development is not going to deliver much. And I think we heard that capacity are needed at many levels, also to build trust. Of course, on the software and the regulatory frameworks, on the one hand, from the workshop from yesterday, lots of concrete suggestions were made, but I think also today in the panel, which was also useful, is that sometimes let's wait with regulation. Let's give space to startups to be creative. And then once things have been advancing, possibly then come in with regulation. And so I think that was also, for me, an interesting point. I think of course, key issue that has also been mentioned by the panel is that we need to deliver. We cannot just make noble statements. I think on the broadband, the EU is concretely building thousands of kilometers of cable and connecting regions and things like that, but a lot more is to happen. And I think there again, coming to the last one, we can only go as far as we go together. I mean, that was clearly stated. I think Also, we have both sides to learn from each other. I think on a number of fields, Africa is showing the way, and so European side can learn, and in other fields, we have maybe done certain things, but we cannot just externalize like this. We have to have differentiated approaches, adjusted to local needs, and I think this is the way how Europe and Africa want to work together. And on these words, I just want to say thank you to the think tanks, ACET, of course, for this time taking brilliantly the lead, to have this very dynamic group yesterday of working together. We really look forward to as concrete as possible policy recommendations that Moses and us will use in our work in terms of further deepening the agenda that we have. We'd like to thank, of course, all the other think tanks that were involved, the African Union Commission, Rwanda for being with us, and my colleagues, in particular, Lana and Damir, who have been working very hard on making this a reality. Again, thank you very much, and an applause to all of you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.